There's a country with 23 million people, its own president, its own military, its own currency, its own passport. It builds 90% of the world's most advanced computer chips, the ones inside your phone, your laptop, probably whatever you're watching this on right now. And officially, it doesn't exist. Not as a rumor, not as a hoax. It has everything a country needs except one thing, the paperwork. That's not a one-off. Right now, in 2026, at least half a dozen places on Earth run their own governments, armies, and economies. And the rest of the world has agreed, on paper, not to call them countries. One of them used to be a country and isn't anymore. One is unrecognized even by the country protecting it. One tiny Pacific island shows up twice in this video, on opposite sides of the planet, trading recognition for money both times. So what actually makes a country real? Not land, not people, something else. Let's go through them. International law's actual checklist for a country: a population, a territory, a government, the ability to deal with other states. That's it. Nowhere does it say anyone else has to agree. But there's an unwritten fifth rule that overrides the other four anyway. You need enough other governments willing to say so out loud on the record. That's not law, that's a vote. And unlike every other vote you've heard of, this one never officially closes. Taiwan, 23 million people. Its own elections, its own military, its own courts. A passport that gets you into 177 countries without a visa. Countries that officially recognize it as a country? 12. 11 UN members, plus the Vatican. Why so few? China insists that any country wanting formal ties with Beijing has to first agree Taiwan isn't a separate one. Most of the world, including the United States, picked the bigger economy. But they didn't walk away completely. Taiwan runs roughly 113 unofficial offices in 71 countries that function exactly like embassies, just without that word on the building. The US calls its own version of this strategic ambiguity, officially not recognizing Taiwan as a country, while a 1979 law, the Taiwan Relations Act, still commits Washington to help defend it if China invades. A promise to protect a country the paperwork insists doesn't exist. The most recent government to cut ties with Taiwan entirely was Nauru, a Pacific island of about 12,000 people, which dropped it for Beijing in January 2024, 2 days after a Taiwanese election. Remember that island. It shows up again later, on the other side of the planet, doing something almost identical. Meanwhile, one company on this barely recognized island, TSMC, builds roughly 90% of the planet's most advanced semiconductors. The chip running the device in your hand right now probably passed through a country that, officially, isn't one. Palestine, recognized by around 150 of the world's 193 countries, close to 80%. Most of Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America. A lot of that arrived at once. In a single week in September 2025, 9 countries recognized Palestine within about a day of each other: France, the UK, Canada, Australia, Portugal, Monaco, Luxembourg, Malta, San Marino, pushing the total past 80% of the UN for the first time ever. And it still isn't a full UN member. Joining doesn't just take a majority vote. It first takes a recommendation from the Security Council, and any one of 5 countries there can kill it with a single veto. One government's no outweighs 150 yeses. Kosovo. Declared independence from Serbia in 2008. Somewhere between 84 and 115 countries recognize it, depending who's counting. Kosovo and Serbia can't even agree on the number because there's no settled legal answer to whether a recognition can be taken back once it's given. Most neutral tallies land around 100, including most of NATO. It has its own army, its own president, its own currency, the euro, adopted unilaterally in 2002 without ever asking the European Central Bank for permission. Blocked from the UN the same way Palestine is. Russia and China, both permanent Security Council members, refuse to recognize it. Not really about Kosovo, about precedent. Russia doesn't want regions breaking from a parent state normalized. China has its own regions it would rather nobody get ideas about. Kosovo's government has actually never even applied for UN membership. They know exactly how the vote ends, and they'd rather not hand Serbia the win of watching it fail on the record. 27 years after the war that started this standoff, roughly 5,000 NATO troops are still stationed there, just in case. Every place so far still runs itself exactly the way a normal country does. The only real argument is over who's allowed to say so out loud. What's coming next stops playing by that rule completely. Western Sahara is losing the argument in real time. In the 1980s, the government representing it, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, was recognized by roughly 80 countries. No Western nation has ever recognized it, but it didn't need them yet. It had momentum everywhere else. By 2026, that number is down to around 36 and still falling. Morocco, which occupies most of the actual territory, keeps winning recognitions back one country at a time. Peru, Ecuador, Panama, and Honduras have all withdrawn theirs in just the last 3 years. Honduras most recently in April 2026. The United States recognized Moroccan sovereignty over the whole territory back in 2020 as part of the deal that got Morocco to normalize relations with Israel. The Sahrawi government controls maybe a fifth of the land it claims. It can't afford full embassies everywhere, so for years it's paid a private diplomatic firm just to represent it abroad. Most of its people have lived in refugee camps across the border in Algeria for close to 50 years, waiting on a vote that keeps sliding backward instead of forward. Recognition isn't just hard to get, it's just as easy to lose. Transnistria might be the strangest place on Earth, a strip of land between Moldova and Ukraine. Its own president, parliament, army. Its own currency, the Transnistrian ruble, worthless the second you cross the border. Lenin statues still stand in its capital. Its flag still carries the hammer and sickle, the only one left on Earth that does. Countries that recognize it? Zero. Not even Russia, the same country that's kept about 1,500 troops there since 1992, guarding a Soviet-era ammunition depot big enough to arm a small war. Here's the part that barely makes sense until you say it out loud. One company, Sheriff, owns the supermarkets, the gas stations, the phone networks, the biggest bank, and the country's top football club. Its founder is worth roughly $2 billion, about double Transnistria's entire economy. The political party tied to that company held 7 of 43 parliament seats back in 2000. In 2026, it holds all 33. And the story is still moving. The cheap Russian gas that ran Transnistria's economy for 3 decades just got cut off after Ukraine refused to renew the pipeline deal that carried it through. A country nobody recognizes might be running out of the one thing that let it survive without recognition. Northern Cyprus. Recognized by exactly one country, Turkey. After Turkish forces split the island in 1974, its capital, Nicosia, got cut in half by a UN buffer zone that's still there today, the last divided capital city in Europe. One casualty of that split was the resort town of Varosha. Before the war, over 100 hotels, beds for 10,000 tourists a night, one of the most famous vacation spots in the Mediterranean. Then everyone ran, and it was sealed shut. For almost 50 years, nobody was allowed back in. Furniture, dishes, decades of dust, untouched since 1974. Thousands of Greek Cypriot families still legally hold the deeds to homes they haven't set foot in since that year. Varosha only partially reopened in the last few years, and the whole island is still legally stuck in limbo. Abkhazia and South Ossetia broke from Georgia in the 1990s, then again in the 2008 war with Russia. Recognized by Russia, by Syria, by Venezuela, by Nicaragua, and by Nauru, that same island from earlier, the one that dropped Taiwan for China. This time, it recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia too, reportedly in exchange for foreign aid. Same tiny country, 2 completely different diplomatic flips on opposite sides of the planet, both apparently for a price. A country's existence in this system can come down to 5 signatures, one of them belonging to an island of 12,000 people you could walk across in an afternoon. Every place so far still exists in some form. This one doesn't, not anymore. For over 3 decades, Nagorno-Karabakh ran itself as its own de facto country, Artsakh. Its own government, its own army, about 120,000 people who lived there their whole lives. In September 2023, Azerbaijan launched a military operation that ended it in 24 hours. Almost the entire population, well over 100,000 people, fled down a single mountain road into Armenia in about a week, one of the fastest, most complete evacuations of a modern population in recent history. Artsak's government formally dissolved itself by the end of that year. It checked every box on the checklist: population, territory, government, the ability to deal with other states, and still disappeared. Existing was never the part that was optional. Being allowed to keep existing was. Back to Taiwan. 23 million people, its own everything, recognized by almost nobody, still building the chips the planet runs on. Notice how many threads kept crossing. The same veto, Russia and China on the Security Council, blocks both Palestine and Kosovo for two unrelated reasons. The same tiny island, Nauru, shows up twice, trading recognition for money on opposite sides of the world. And the same checklist, population, territory, government, the ability to deal with other states, gets passed by every single place in this video, including the one that no longer exists. What decides whether the world calls them real was never that checklist. It's a decision. A running vote that never technically closes, that shifts with every election, every war, every pipeline deal, every veto. One that can go into reverse or end a 30-year-old country in a single afternoon. The map you memorized in school was never a record of what's true. It's just the current tally of a vote still being counted.